Hello, everybody. I'm Raina at Garden District Bookshop, and I want to welcome you back to Virtual Happy Hour. Thank you very much for joining me again. Tonight, I am going to be talking to Katy Simpson Smith, who is originally from Mississippi, but lives here in New Orleans now and has for quite a while. Her books are behind me here, The Story of Land and Sea, Free Men, and The Everlasting. She has one more that we don't have on our shelf. We Have Raised All of You, which is a book about motherhood in like the 1750s and early 1800s. I'm totally going to talk a little bit about that too. I'm going to click this button though and let Katy into the room, and we're going to get the conversation started. Hello, Katy.
Hello, Raina.
How are you this evening?
Good. How's it going on this rainy day for you?
Well, I've been stuck inside all day because I've been at work here in the bookshop. I work on Mondays, so I get here at like 9:30 and then just stay and set up the table. And like, I've heard the rain, but I have not had to experience it.
Y'all don't have windows in your store, which is one of the only problems with it, I will say.
Yeah, not having like a storefront to the sidewalk. I see other pictures of other indie bookstores, and they make these amazing window displays, and I'm like, I don't have a window. Like,
Yeah.
I want to put
like isolated cell that's just like filled with magical literature.
We do have these awesome skylights though, which you can see. That's so we can always tell if it, as it's getting dark or light, or is it raining outside.
Yeah, as you get the emergency alerts from Nola to your phone.
Right? Oh my gosh, I have all of them. And because we can't really see outside, you get ones like, pull your car up on the neutral ground. And I'm like, should I go check my car? What is happening? Like, should I just ignore it? I'm just going to pretend it's not happening until I have to go home.
Yeah, I will say one of the value of Zoom events is that I got that text an hour ago, and I was like, oh, I can't. Like, is this going to affect the Garden District thing? And no, it's not.
No, in fact, I think not only is it still on, it might benefit us because other people are like, I can't leave the house now. Like,
well, how do I fill my time?
I guess we'll tune in to Virtual Happy Hour. Yeah. Speaking of that, everybody who's watching, if you have any comments or questions for Katy or for me, type them in the comments. We can see those. We will answer your questions. We are here for all of that. You have those amazing like windows. Are those doors behind you?
They are doors. I weirdly have 3 doors on the back of my house that all lead to the same place. So you just like pick whatever door you want to get to the backyard, which is kind of magical.
Was it broken up at one point, like to different apartments or something?
This is like a back room that was added to the house, maybe like in the early to mid 20th century. And I can't explain what they were thinking with the doors.
Cool. In case everyone needed to get out at the same time and there was a lot of people?
A lot of people, or it's like a yes, no, maybe door. And like you make important life decisions by like picking the door that you're going to exit out of.
I like it. I think we should go with that. Makes it feel more important which door you pick. Do you ever walk out the wrong door and go, oh, shit. No, today's not my day.
Yeah, exactly. And then everything is terrible for the rest of the day.
It's like I went out the no door. No good. Okay, so what are you drinking? Since it's happy hour, I usually bring that up. And I have to show off that I remembered to bring my kitty cup today.
Beautiful.
I used it the first time for Virtual Happy Hour just because I was looking for a fancy cup in my, and so many people commented on it. I just kept using it. And then when we got here to the bookstore and I started doing it from the bookstore a few weeks ago, I kept forgetting it at home. So I finally remembered it. It's just coffee.
Coffee. Can you do both iced and hot beverages in there, or is it only good for cold?
Mostly cold. I mean, it's pretty thin. So warm, yes. Hot, no.
Okay.
What you got?
I'm drinking a hot tea. I've recently started adding like a tiny splash of milk to my tea, which I thought was for like wusses, but it actually like really cuts the bitterness. And I find myself really enjoying it. So maybe I'm secretly a wuss, but it's been delightful.
I thought it was very British. I don't know. I could have just invented that. I just felt like everyone I knew that put cream in their tea somehow had spent some time in the UK or was from the UK, and maybe that's just the connection.
Yes, I am secretly a princess, so this is all connected.
You were destined to eventually put some cream in your coffee, so
yes,
that's good. Or in your tea. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So if anyone has been following along on Katy's Instagram, which you should do, and I can give you a link to that, Katy has been inundated with kittens recently. And this is definitely something I wanted to talk to you about, Katy, because I'm like, how do you get, because on Instagram you get like, a couple sentences. Oh, look, I've got a bunch of cats. And I'm like, where did these bunch of cats come from? How did this happen? Okay, so tell me about this kitten thing and how did you get all these kittens and where are they from?
Yes. So this is a pandemic phenomenon, I will say. I had a lot of time on my hands and I was looking for ways to be of use to the city of New Orleans. I have done other things, like I've also been volunteering for this city-run vaccine sites. But there's an organization called Trap Dat Cat, which is an amazing TNR group here in the city, which is Trap, Neuter, Return. And so their main job is getting feral cats off the street, neutered and spayed, and put back so that they don't contribute to the overpopulation problem in the city. But their secondary job is dealing with the inevitable kittens that they run across. And they put out a notice last summer that was like, we have a bunch of kittens. Is anyone interested in fostering? I was like, yes, kittens. I had cats like years ago, but they both died. And I was like so brokenhearted that I haven't been able to adopt any cats since. And I travel a lot. And so I just thought it's not a good, never a good time. But this is like super low commitment and like maximum, emotional payout. Because you get, tons of cuddles and then you get to, launch them off into their next life.
So how long on average do you have each like litter of kittens? Or
yeah, so I started with 2 and Teresa, who runs Trap Dat Cat, said probably like 2 to 3 weeks. And I ended up having them for 2 months.
Okay.
So I did get emotionally attached, which is what I was hoping to avoid. But we found an amazing adopter for them. Then I got a litter of 4 around Christmas. And I had 2 of them for a month and 2 of them for 4 months, I think. So that was really intense. And then I took a break for a while. And then in April, I got half of a litter of 6. So I had 3 kittens and then a friend of mine had 3 kittens. And we were socializing them and swapped. So I got 2 kittens. And then just this past week, after the tornado went through the city, it apparently separated a mother and her litter of 4 little babies. They were found like half drowning in a mud puddle. And they're teeny tiny. They're like half a pound each. And we took them in and she was like, do you want these like kittens that may or may not live?
Oh no.
Like, no. So I took them and I've had them for 4 days and they're all alive. So
I don't know what the window is for that, but 4 days seems good.
I think 4 days we're going strong. They're like getting little fat bellies. They seem better hydrated. They're getting like antibiotics and eye droppers like every 12 hours. So they're highly medicated.
They're great kittens then. They just play around.
Exactly.
Okay, so also today you posted like what the toothbrush is for. Okay, so here's the way I read that. We finally figured out what the toothbrush is for. And seriously, you guys, you have to go to our Instagram and watch this little video of this cat getting its belly brushed with the toothbrush. Okay, but it sounds like they gave you a toothbrush. They're like, here's your fostering kit, and it included a toothbrush. This is true. Okay, good. Because this is what I was envisioning. And then I also would be like, what the hell is this? Why did they give me a toothbrush? Like, this is not going to fit in the cat's mouth. Is that what it's for? It's for like brushing the cat?
Yeah. So it's supposed to stimulate like self-grooming instincts in kittens because they don't naturally like know how to clean themselves. And so it's like to replicate the like roughness of a mother's tongue.
Okay.
Before I was just like, how are we going to do this? And then as soon as I put it on the cat's belly, it was like in heaven.
The kitty knows what it's for.
Do you want me to try to show you a kitten?
Sure. Like, yes, kittens on camera is Good stuff.
You want to go see some people on the internet? Come see the internet? Yeah. Okay, so this is.
Oh my goodness.
She's never been out of the bathroom.
Oh.
Let's see if I can extricate.
She's like, no, I'm good. I'm good. Here's good. There we go. Hi, kitty. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you try not to get attached. Do you name them? I mean, what do you call them if you?
I name them all. Okay, sweet.
Is adorable.
It's just a cutie pie.
Yep.
So these are the mud puddle kittens. So we name them Puddle, Drizzle, and Raindrop, and Galoshes.
Oh, that's adorable.
You're a star.
You've come up with the best way to help for COVID.
Yeah, it's been very emotionally satisfying. If anyone wants to adopt kittens, just let me know.
Katie has a line on kitten adoption.
I can be your provider.
You're like, go, just give me a call. I'll meet you down in the corner.
Meet you on the dark alley with a tiny fur bundle. We'll make it work.
I rescued both of my kittens. I didn't foster them though, but I rescued both of my kittens from a rescue place. And my oldest cat is like 5 years old or 6 years old now. And she was found in the flooding up in Baton Rouge, up and around Baton Rouge. Same sort of situation like you're describing. It seemed like, her and her litter mates had been just separated from their mom because they were like maybe 5 or 6 weeks old, and they were there and the mom was just not there.
It's so striking, like the vulnerability of tiny creatures and the fact that like some of them survive on the streets and grow up and catch rats or whatever. Like it's mind-boggling to me, and it like makes my own like desires for comfort and security feel kind of lame, like these guys are making it work, and here I am like in a house with a roof and 4 walls protected from the rain, and complaining it's a rainy day and I can't like go ride my bike.
Yeah, there's a cat that lives in my yard that is not my cat, but he definitely lives there now. I don't feed the cat, but I've seen them 10 times over the course of the last few months, and they now clearly live in my backyard because they just hang out on the little table in the backyard. They hang out on the chairs. I go out. I have a hammock now, which is the best investment ever made. I just go back out there, and the cat's just like wandering around, looks over at me like, hey, oh, you're here. Okay, cool. Yeah. Just wanders over there. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess you can stay. You're just fine living here. But they're street cat. Clearly, he's scrawny. He's, he when a loud noise happens, he gets kind of skittish. But at the same time, he's decided that the yard is a safe space for him. And so,
it makes me think about like, I don't know, like writing a novel from the perspective of like a feral cat. And like, if you want like drama and conflict and, action, like what could be better than like, a tomcat, like on the streets, like looking for a mate, like trying to evade the TNR trappers,
right?
Looking for food. Maybe that'll be my next book.
There you go. And most of your stuff is like historical fiction, so you can just make it a period piece. You can just
thinking like 19th century London.
There you go. I would read that.
First cat.
Wow. See, there you go. And then you get to see both the tomcat, scenario out on the streets, but also clearly Jack the Ripper is gonna like his cat. So you get this like humanitarian like view of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
I would read this.
Okay.
I would do that. Cool. There is There's the Warrior Cat series, which is a middle grade series, and they live in the wild though. They're not they're not city cats. Well, they start as a city cat and then they become wild cats. But that's one that my son read years ago, and he's like, "Mom, you should read this." I'm like, "Whatever. I got things to do, buddy. I love you. You know, like I'm reading this book and that book, and I'll get to it." And then, of course, as soon as I did, I was like, "I see why you like these." He read,
Interesting.
but there was like 7 or 8, and there's more than that in the series. But he read like 7 or 8 of them, just like back to back to back. And I finally was like, "Okay, I get it," because it was just character. Like I fell in love with all these cats.
Yeah. Is it similar to like Redwall? Did you read the Redwall books when you were growing up?
I did. It's a little bit less intense than Redwall, but yes, similar where you love that little mouse and you love those characters. You really get into the characters, and it's the same way. And eventually the part in those Warrior Cats books is as they graduate up the ranks, their name changes. So my son can spout off the name from apprentice to warrior to like leader. Like he can spout off every single name of every like cat. And I'm like, look, I remember their kitten names, their apprentice names, because once that name lives now in my mind, I'm like, I know they're a leader, but they're still the apprentice name. God, you don't know anything. Like, I'm sorry. I only have so much capacity in my old brain. So you
a lot to ask. Yeah. When I was young, maybe elementary school, middle school, my brother and I were obsessed with the Redwall books, and we started writing our own series based on the animals who lived at the pond. It was a few blocks from our house. So there were like ducks and geese and owls. I think they were maybe all birds. But they were like warring factions and like turf wars and maybe like a little love story between the 2 owls. But I always thought like it had a lot of potential if we had been older and more talented.
I know, you can find it in a drawer somewhere, and that's your kid's book.
Yeah. My brother actually turned into a children's book writer. So
I will see.
Yeah.
There's the beginning just of the animals around the pond. That was what it took. Spark that creativity. Just go from there. That's awesome. That's awesome. We did want to ask you something about your books, because they are all like historical fiction, except for We Have Raised All of You, which is historical, not fiction.
Correct.
What is it like? Why historical fiction?
Yes. So
that's a blanket. That's a very umbrella question. It's just very open-ended. So you go with that.
Yeah. So the historical nonfiction book is a clue, which is that I have a dark past as a historian. I went to graduate school in history. I thought I was going to teach history. Both my parents are college professors, so I thought like that was my route. And part of the reason that I pursued history at all was because it seemed like a more legitimate and maybe like financially stable way of storytelling. So I was always like writing on the side, but as a hobby, and I was like, okay, how can I take these stories and turn it into like a profession? And history seemed like a profession. But after going through graduate school and doing the archival work and figuring out how to tell stories that were truthful, which is really difficult when you are trying to talk about the lives of people who didn't leave a lot of primary sources behind. So at the time I was working on stories about enslaved mothers and Cherokee and Catawba mothers in the Carolinas, and poor white mothers who didn't leave like diaries, who didn't like write tons of letters to their best friends talking about the experiences of having children. And so I had to piece together these accounts from, like a plantation record where a slave owner would say that one of the enslaved women on his plantation had a miscarriage, and he just made a notation because he whipped her for having a miscarriage. I'm like, okay, well, that's this tiny like seed of a story. But as a historian, I can't really do anything other than like responsibly speculate about what that woman would have endured or experienced. But I really wanted to tell the story. I wanted to tell the whole story. I wanted to talk about emotions, and I wanted to talk about, sort of ripple effects of these tiny moments. And then I remembered, well, you can if you just make it up.
Well, yeah.
So I veered away from history and got into an MFA program in writing and started to write using a lot of the same resources that I had been looking at for my doctorate. So, letters and diaries from the 18th century, stories from the 18th century, and that's how I found the sort of nugget of history that became my first novel. And it was great because I knew so much about the period already. I knew what books they were reading. I knew how they thought about religion and family and slavery. So I didn't have to work really hard to like build up that research foundation. So in some ways, it's kind of like a lazy way into writing fiction, which I discovered when I wrote my most recent book, which is not set in the early American South, and set in Rome, which I know nothing about. And I had to do like real research for the first time. I was like, oh my God. But yeah, that's how I sort of got into historical fiction, wanting to tell stories that are hard to tell in any other way.
And I've heard that a lot from other historical fiction writers where you have you've heard this real story, but you don't know the end, or you don't know how they got to the end, or, things like that. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna piece this together. And that is so much of what you try to do I love history as well. And like when you're piecing together your family history, for example, like lots of people do that. And you've got a letter here and a deed there and a, picture over here. And then like, you can't connect them. You have to learn, you got to put those pieces together yourself. Mm-hmm. And so you just, you write the story to piece them all together. And that's fascinating. And you can tell all the research that goes into these books. Like that's one of the great things. Like they read like that. Your books do read like that. Like you have a picture and a letter and a thing, and like there's so much you can't tell exactly what is a historical piece that you've found and what is something you've written, but you've pieced it together so beautifully, and the world is so like these people are in that era, and you do a good job. 2 thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Manda says, you might have already touched upon this, but I'm really interested in your inspiration behind your recent book and why you chose the religious theme. It was really cool to me, and I loved it, especially as someone who lives in a very Catholic and magical city of New Orleans.
Yes.
Talking about that ever last year.
New Orleans is indeed incredibly Catholic and magical. I've always been a little bit obsessed with Catholicism. I was not raised Catholic, but several of my closest friends and growing up were. So I got to go to like midnight mass on Christmas Eve. And whenever my family traveled, my mother's an art historian. And so we always went to churches because that's where all the good art is. So I just got used to the intoxicating scent of those censers that they wave as they go up and down the aisles. And I don't know, there's something about the coldness of the stone and the quiet and the fact that like everyone there is like really wanting something, whether that's like a connection to God or like they want their problems to be solved. They want their husband's cancer to be cured. They want their son to get into college. They want to find true love. So religion has always been like a very rich territory for me as a novelist because it gets into like very basic human desires and also like how humans organize their world. And there aren't many things other than religion that like encompass so much about a human's like individual life experience that it can be used as like an excuse for terrible things, but also like a rationale for the very best within us all. And then you zoom out and you look at the history of Catholicism over the past 2,000 years, and it's just like this roller coaster craziness. One of my favorite time periods to write about was the 9th century, when all the popes were, setting up harems in the Vatican and like doing crazy, like kinky sex stuff all the time. and, executing their family members because they didn't like them. And I didn't even realize until I started researching for the book that the concept of papal infallibility did not arise until the 19th century. For the 1800s, there wasn't this idea that the Pope can do no wrong. Before that, popes were mortal, and therefore it's okay, like, that they sinned sometimes. Seems to me like a healthier attitude. So yeah, I had to learn a lot. I had to learn a lot about the development of the church over time. But it was such a satisfying framework to stick my characters into and see the different relationships that they developed with God.
Did you make any trips to Rome in researching this book?
Yes, I got to go for a month at the very beginning of the writing process and then a month at the end of the writing process. And it was sublime. And I ate all the gelato and saw all the art.
For science, for research, right?
Yes. There's definitely some gelato eating scenes in the book. And I had to, research the veracity of the size and shape of the spoon and what it tastes like on the tongue.
No. I was asked a question and I'm like, I don't think I know the answer to that. Because we are still open. We're working in the bookstore. I'm just hiding in the back corner by the YA books.
Are y'all still mask mandated?
So we are mask suggested.
Okay.
The whole rink, it was kind of, it took us a little bit because we kind of had to do a collective decision. Because for anybody who has not been in the rink, it's this great old building, and we have about 7 retail shops in here, but we all share like an atrium space. So you kind of come into the atrium and then you go off, as you go back down the atrium to the different retail spaces. So we had to kind of go, okay, what are we all gonna do? And so we're mask suggested. And I have this little sign, this like handwritten sign. I was like, unmasked employee, live event in progress. So you can see.
Proceed at your own peril.
Exactly. Yeah. Out there. Okay. So let me talk to you about you. We mentioned your book about motherhood and how that kind of gave you, that's a clue to your historical fiction. But We Have Raised All of You, that's a more recent book, right?
No, that was my very first book. So it came out.
Why did that come?
2013?
I don't know. That came out. I don't know when I was doing my research. It showed up at the top, and I was like, "Oh, that's the most recent one." So that's that was your sort of foray into writing, I guess.
Yeah,
becoming more of an author, and that is fascinating to me. So this is a book about motherhood from 1750 to 1835. And was that I have not read it. We don't have it here in the store, and I need to get my hands on it. But is it just chronicling these things? Because you don't think about motherhood. It's so weird. You don't think about motherhood's one of those things, like it just happens. You just do it. People have always done it. I mean, and so we have all these parenting books now, but if you go back 150, 200 years, it's babies everywhere, but there's no advice. There's little, there's no parenting book. You just, maybe you talk to your mom or something. That's what you have. So can you tell me a little bit about that book, since I actually haven't been able to see it?
Yeah, of course. So one of the sort of starting points for this book was this idea. A lot of women's historians and feminist historians at the time had kind of separated what we think of as extraordinary women's history. So women who cross-dressed and went and served in a Revolutionary War regiment, or women who after their husbands died, they took over the family business and ran taverns or brothels on their own and achieved quite a bit of status that way. Or, Abigail Adams, who influenced her husband in terms of how sort of early government systems were created. And then there's the rest of women who were downtrodden and essentially powerless in this society where women were second-class citizens. And motherhood is this kind of, I saw as this near universal experience. So many, many women in the late 18th, early 19th century America had children. If we say that the majority of women were powerless, then we are also saying that motherhood was like a task that had no kind of self-worth attached to it, that it was just, again, natural and also a way to further repress women by keeping them in the home. So like motherhood tied women to this private space. But I came to this with the idea that if you're a human in the world, you are going to try to figure out how to achieve self-worth. Like you are searching for meaning. You want whatever tiny bit of power you can achieve. And if motherhood was this thing that so many women were experiencing, maybe that's where they were getting it. Maybe motherhood was not seen by them as this like oppressive role, but as a way that they could wield power within the family system. So I started reading a lot of letters and diaries and did a lot of archival research. And what I found was absolutely that motherhood was a source of power, that elite white women got to educate their children with like zero input from the men. So they got to pass down worldviews and they got to decide like what was worth learning, which then like educated the next generation of young American citizens that then shaped the way America was. So like women were doing that. But enslaved women were, risking their lives to try to teach their children how to read and write in the darkness of night, or we're teaching them just much more basic lessons of survival, like how to speak to white slave owners who were angry or who were threatening your life. They created these amazing female networks of support. So I have a chapter called like Black Aunts, and it's, cousins and non-relatives and grandmothers who are all charged with taking care of the children of the plantation. So, when mothers recognized their own vulnerability and, confronted the fact that they might not be there to see their child grow up, they made sure that all these other people were in place to take care of them. And Native American women at the time, were in a very different society that valued women a lot more in many ways. And were seen as like the primary farmers, therefore like life givers. Like agriculture was very attached to childbearing. And so they were, wildly respected because they like brought forth corn and babies, which is like the two things you need to like, sustain a society. So it was really fun to sort of like dig into a period where we assumed that women had no power and instead find that they were like carving power everywhere that they could.
Well, and it is, like you said, it's a thing that you don't think about in the beginning, and then why is everybody doing it then? Like it's and I'm thinking about it, and it's so true. Like even with my son, like in the beginning, I'm much more hands-on. I have much more to say, what he goes here, does that, or I'm reading the stories and I'm doing the things, and I'm picking them. So I have much more of an influence over that. And especially like in today's society, dads are much more hands-on usually, but like you go back, it's like, oh, have a baby, have fun. Okay, I'm out again. I have journals from my great-grandfather and great-grandfather. And in one of them, he has a baby. Okay, his wife has a baby. And I'm reading this, and it's one of those like 5-year journals where you write like a sentence a day, and it literally says baby born, and the next day it's like picked corn. Like it's right back to like and there's nothing, like it goes for weeks and weeks and weeks. They just mention the baby again. Like there's a thing, take baby to doctor or something. Like
Yeah.
That's it. Like there's nothing. It's literally like baby born. Okay, hold, picked corn, went to town, like
Yeah.
kind of like, okay, and that's a perfect example. And great grandma is home hands on with that baby, like
Yeah.
shaping and molding and taking care of that baby. And he's like,
And she
had to go
did not leave a diary behind that like records
right.
her thoughts.
Yes, I mean, at least if she did, it's not here
Yeah.
anymore. You know, but probably not because she didn't have the time to write that. She's just taking care of the baby, and he's like, "Oh, went to go do this," and he has the free time while he's waiting for the guy to show up to buy the corn or something. Who knows?
Yeah.
He's just writing it. But yeah, and that is fascinating too.
It also like speaks to like the power of the written word, that like the people who write stuff down are the ones whose stories get remembered. You have this like snapshot of your great grandfather, but you probably don't know anything about your great grandmother.
Yeah, very little.
Yeah, and so I feel like one of the things that fiction can do is like recover lost voices, and give voice to the people who never had that opportunity.
Yeah, that's well. See, that inspires me. That I could take that journal and just pick out all the pieces where he mentioned family or mentioned her specifically, and then combine that with some like paperwork. I'm sure I can find like specific deeds or specific, birth, death certificates, and his story.
You totally should. That'd be amazing.
that I could pitch that. I could pitch that to my mom, and I can help her she could help me do research.
Yeah.
She would do that. All right, let's see. Amanda has another a question. This is a good segue. Amanda says, you'd probably love the book Children of God's Fire. Have you heard of that? I have not, but I will look it up. It talks about the role the Catholic Church played in justifying slavery in Brazil through primary sources. So that could be fascinating for sure. New inspiration for the next book setting? ? See, we can segue into, are you working on something?
Yes, this is a very good question. The short answer is no. The long answer is yes. I sold a book in February, so there is a book coming out on the horizon, which is a good way to trick people into making them think that I have been busy. But I actually wrote the book back in 2018, so long before the pandemic. I'm excited about it coming out. It's partly historical, partly contemporary, also set in Rome. It is what I describe as a botanical murder mystery.
Okay.
Yes, about two sort of botanist assistants, both female, who encounter kind of like crummy botanist bosses who are both male. They are tasked with cataloging all the species of plants that grow in the Roman Colosseum, which is more than you might think.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like them grappling with the role of women in science within this kind of strange enclosure, and then figuring out like how to break out of it with deadly results.
Okay, so 2 questions that come to mind. 1, are these women like based on real women? Maybe not specifically, but like, is that a job that you stumbled upon?
No. It's a job I would love to have if someone wants to invent it and give it to me.
And there are tons of flora in the Colosseum? Okay, what is that?
So in 1855, which was the most recent cataloging of them prior to the 21st century, they counted 420 species of plants.
Like, it just, okay, were they planted in there on purpose, or that's just what, if you went into this space and started looking around, that you would find that many different plants?
They're all wild. Some of them are like just native weeds to central Italy, but some of them are plants that are endemic to parts of Africa, and scientists like couldn't figure out how they got to the Colosseum until they realized that there were all these animals brought over from Africa to fight the gladiators in early Roman history. And so like lions and tigers and bears and whatever came with like seeds in their digestive systems, on their fur, and that they might have just like fallen out and sprouted and then grown for 1,000 years.
That's fascinating. Well, people came from all over too. So anybody who was anybody, if they were there visiting, they would go to see, whatever was going on in the Colosseum. So yeah, that is fascinating. I've never been to Rome. or the Colosseum. So what about now? If you go, do you see any?
So it feels very bare now. It feels like a lot of stone and sand. There are still, I think, over 100 species there. And I haven't been back since I wrote that project, and so I'm really curious to go and like see how many I can find. But there was a big sort of cleaning campaign, I think that was tied to Mussolini, where like all the overgrowth in Rome he wanted purged, and he wanted everything to be, fascist and clean. Yeah. So there used to be like families in the area used to have like their kitchen gardens there, and there would be like growing crops, and there were several little altars that people would come pray at every day, and all that got wiped out. So a lot of the sort of weirder species aren't there anymore, but there's still a lot, and I want to go back and find them.
That's one of those things, like if you've never been to visit or to stay for any length of time to these places, you still romanticize them in your head. You see these storybook or movie versions, and you don't think about, like you're talking about a community garden. You don't think about people just living there, which of course I feel bad about, because I live in New Orleans, which is you have the exact same problem, especially like the French Quarter and the Garden District and some of those areas where people are like, oh, people live here. I lived in the French Quarter for only a year, and the amount of times when people found out I lived in the quarter and they said that to me, I was like, yeah, like these are all just apartments. People live here. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a cultural Disneyland. People think that it's like created for them to explore and gawk at, but then leave.
Right. Or like when something becomes a certain age, historical, then it's just like maybe where the Liberty Bell is. Like you go and you look at it and then you walk away, or like Independence Hall and stuff. Yes, no one lives there. It's the building, but that's like what people imagine when they think of a historical building. And to be fair, I think of the Colosseum as that way now, but of course it wasn't.
Yeah, I think it speaks to like our relationship with history as a society, that we're like a little bit uncomfortable with living in the past. Like the American impulse mostly is to tear down old things and build new things. In other cities, I know that like if you buy a new home, like it's valued, like, oh, this was like new construction. And New Orleans, it's like, oh, it's like new construction. Like that's too bad. And I think New Orleans and Rome have this commonality of sort of figuring out how to live within all the layers of the past. And so one of the amazing things about Rome is that you see they didn't like tear down, ancient ruins to build, the Renaissance palaces. They just built them on top. And then they built, the CVS like in the corner of the Renaissance palace. And so it's all like this amalgamation that forces you to reckon with history every day, which I think is something that's super valuable and we don't do enough.
Yeah. I think that is one of the things that's unique about New Orleans, where we sort of do that same thing. And anytime that doesn't happen, we see these glaring examples of how, like, what's going on, Hard Rock Cafe, our hotel, and we're like, well, let me tell you where we were wrong. That was a perfectly fine building, and look at what it is now. It's very obvious what's going on. And when I first moved here, which I've been here like 15 years now, it was so different, because I'm from Florida, Southwest Florida. We are the like epitome of just pave it down and put something new there. Like I've seen like lots full of these beautiful old trees be literally cut down, paved over, and then like 2 palm trees stuck in the middle of the parking lot. I'm like, God, why did we do that? Even if you needed to put something there, like you could have worked around a couple of those trees. You didn't need to. But one of the things I loved about here is the appreciation for the past, and not just paving it over. I mean, things get updated and changed, and yes, some things get torn down, but the idea that remodeling or remaking what you have is as given as much credence as some new construction or something. And my house has been around for like 100 years, so it's probably fine.
I know. It survived so many hurricanes by now.
Right. And And when we found like these fire maps. That's how we dated our house, because we couldn't figure out. So sometime between like 1910 and 1928, our house was built. Because in 1910 it didn't look like it does now.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
That's fascinating. I have a friend who goes through and like hunts underneath people's houses for just stuff, and she does it for the historical stuff. It's not for like really treasure hunting, like I'm gonna make money. It's treasure hunting, like a glass bottle and a piece of pottery and like different things. And she posts on her Instagram too, and she's like, "This is what I found today." God. It was like between this block and this block, and this is what I found. And it's just fascinating, the stuff that you find.
Yeah, even like digging in the garden, I'm always hitting like random stuff, like Mardi Gras beads from 20 years ago, or like I found a nail. I found a nail the other day that is like hand forged. I don't know if your viewers.
Yeah.
It's like super cool.
That's so awesome. Yeah. Well, and who knows what that's from or who that's from, or what just those little pieces of history are really fascinating to me too.
Yeah. And you like touch something and there's a kind of magic that like you're touching whatever once touched it.
Right? And yeah, no, that's fascinating. I don't have anything to add. We see eye to eye on that for sure.
History nerds.
Another thing that I noticed also in your Instagram profile, and you say this, I think, in your bio too, or something similar. Hunting smallness and strangeness. That's like your Instagram bio. And I remember that you posted, oh my gosh, it was this video of you dancing in front of your bookcase. And when was it? Was it at the beginning of the pandemic? When was that?
Yeah, last March.
Okay. So when we were standing here at the bookstore, and we're like, it was, everything's closed. We're kind of like depressed. We're busy because people are calling. Oh, do you have this book? And yes, and I think maybe let me go see it. And but the world is just complete chaos. And things are falling apart. And I was scrolling through, like, it was an Instagram, right? And I'm scrolling through, and I clicked it, and I'm like, is she doing a dance? And I had to turn the sound up. Like, this is a real story. I turned the sound up, and I'm like, guys, this is Katy Simpson Smith. You need to watch this. You're like, I don't have it up right now on your Instagram, but you guys do go follow Katy on her Instagram. And she's doing this like dance. Like, scroll back through it and find it. And it was just so great. It was so perfect. And I could also like imagine, I don't know what your motivation for doing it, but for us, like, I'm like, you're probably doing the same thing. You're probably like a little depressed and a little bored and a little like, what do I do? And then you're like, here, I'm just going to set this phone up right here. Do a little dance. It's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
It was perfect timing.
Yeah. I think we were all just like trying to figure out like where our joy was. Like, our joy just kind of vanished overnight, and was replaced by like existential dread. And like dancing, that was where my joy was.
You're so right too. It's like the pandemic kind of forced us to look and what makes you happy, because maybe you go to the same place for coffee, or you go to the same happy hour every Friday, or you go to see this friend every other week, or you get in these patterns and these routines. You go to work, you could do just what you do, and you would say, oh, this makes me happy, or that makes me happy, but then all of a sudden you take all that away. You just can't go do any of it. And you really have to like think, okay, well, was it just the act of the repetition and the routine, or do I really miss that thing?
Yeah. Would you say that you came to any personal revelations during the pandemic?
That is a good question. I think that it kind of reinforced things that I had thought previously. Like, I love to travel, and I haven't done enough of it. And in this way that you're like, oh, well, I'll go to Europe. Like, I mean, I'll whatever, I'm going to go, right? Eventually, but you never really put it on paper. You never really like go, okay, well, here's my date and here's my budget and make it happen. You know, and also like my son is 14 now, and as your kids get older, like you start going, oh, it's okay. He just likes to, you know, it's okay if we don't do dinner together every night. It's okay if we don't do this every time. It's okay if and then all of a sudden this pandemic hit. And I'm like, why isn't that okay? Why, you know?
Yeah.
So sort of reinforce these things that I used to think, but I think I had gotten in just this cycle of routine. So as we come out of it, I'm definitely regrouping and reprioritizing my life again. And that's good. That's good for sure.
Yeah.
I feel good about it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So Amanda has one more question. Katy,
You're number one question asker.
There's other people watching. I see you watching and not asking questions. Do you have any book recommendations for people who loved your book, The Everlasting, and want something similar?
Oh, good question. If you have not already read David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, I highly recommend that. It is similar in terms of form, like he moves in kind of this pyramid shape through different time periods. He goes into the future and then he like works his way backwards. So it was definitely an inspiration for me in thinking about how I could tell a story non-traditionally with time as a kind of like malleable element. So I love that. In terms of like good Roman stuff, there is a book by Marguerite Yourcenar called Hadrian. Oh my God. Hadrian's. I'm not going to go to look to my bookshelf because I'll be there. She wrote a book about Hadrian that is beautiful and it's very like psychologically insightful in a way that I don't know, like a lot of early Roman stuff kind of turns it into stereotype. But she like goes deep into personality and psyche and it's just really wonderful. So I'd recommend those. John Williams, who wrote Stoner, which has been super popular recently, he also wrote a book called Augustus about that time period that I have actually not read yet, but it's supposed to be very good. And finally, I would recommend a book called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which sounds like old and snooty and a little bit philosophical, but it's this like, it's his record of his kind of thoughts about humanity and life and how to live a good and moral life. He actually appears as a bad character in my book because he condemns one of my other characters to death. But in actuality, he was a very thoughtful emperor and has a lot of things to say that I think are still relevant for daily life. So I'd recommend that.
All right. I definitely missed one. I have had Meditations and Memoirs of Hadrian. Memoirs of Hadrian.
Thank you.
That's the title. So, but I missed one in between.
Oh, John Williams' book, Augustus.
Yes. All right. Those were a great recommendation. See, the list of links works for me later too. So I'm going to use that as some book selling tips.
Okay.
That's perfect. Oh, and she already owns, Maggie owns the one by Marcus. It's amazing. So Marcus. I love how we're on a first name basis.
Marcus. Our old buddy.
Yeah, it works. So that's a good question. So Marcus Aurelius he's in your he's in your book.
Yeah.
So what was the character that you gave him, like the personality you gave him in your book, was that based on stuff you found or just you wanted to put in a
Yeah. So I had been reading his meditations as like a way to get into like the mental state of people in the time period. Like how did they think of life? How did they think of ethics? But I also knew from his sort of biography that he was an emperor who, while more sort of liberal minded than some of his predecessors, also still like killed some Christians. And so it was fascinating to me to think about like why he would hold that duality of like liberal mindedness and sort of extreme empathy, but also like being willing to murder people on behalf of the state. And he's only in the book for like 2 pages, but It was just like an opportunity for me to like figure out how he might have ticked.
Yeah, and people in power like that, it's interesting to like try and figure out what happens behind the scenes of those positions, because just like what you're talking about, if you read his writing and you read, what he seemed to believe, it looks in this direction. But then he also did these two things, which is weird. Like, why? And then, what was it that went on with that position that forced, seemingly, or not, maybe that guy just pissed him off. Who knows?
Right. It also speaks to like how difficult it is to lead like an actually moral life.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all set out to be good people, I think, but there's so many decisions we have to make in the course of the day, in the course of a lifetime, that veer us away from our better instincts. And I feel lucky that I don't have that much power like in our society in terms of sort of systemic power, because I don't have to make those kinds of choices. And like instead I get to sit in judgment and be like, how dare he do that? And why isn't, like why isn't Biden doing more for refugees on the border? And it's like, oh, like I don't have to make those calls. And so I just get to like sit here and try to do the right thing in a very limited scope. In some ways, I get frustrated that my scope is so limited. And in some ways, I'm very grateful that I don't have more of it.
Well, and just like, fostering kittens, you have to look for the places in your own life, in the power that you do have, or the situation you're in, that you can do good, and realize that, the little things are important too.
And I think that
seems like little. You're saving lives. You're saving lives. Even, tiny lives.
Yeah. And that's I think, pandemic lesson about joy too, is that like you have to find joy in these like small moments and in like the daily rhythms of your life, rather than like looking ahead too far in the future and being like, oh, like 6 months from now, I want to go to Europe. Like, well, actually, like what can I do like right here and now that both like, does good for the world, but also like does good for me and like makes me happy and puts a smile on my face. And that can be as simple as like adding a little milk to your tea.
Right? It's true. And sharing that story. And then now I'll add cream to our tea. At least I'll try it.
We'll all be princesses.
There we go. Hope you should definitely move Cloud Atlas to the top of your TBR. It's so good.
So good.
Definitely. Well, Katy, we have made it to an hour. So I just want to thank you so much for joining me tonight for Virtual Happy Hour.
Thank you. Do you want one more kitten glance?
Oh, sure. If you have kittens, we can go over by a minute for kittens.
It's been behind me the whole time.
Oh, she's been sitting there?
Yep.
He's like, I don't know how to get back to the bathroom.
Yep. I'm probably going to find like a pile of poop behind me.
Just don't lean back. You're fine.
Everything's fine.
Aw. Well, thank everybody for joining us and for commenting and watching along. All of Katy's books, most of which are behind me and are signed, we can get them all here at the bookstore if we don't have them on our shelf already. And we do have usually our books, but Katy's books are signed since she lives local. She stops by and just signs whenever she's in the area. So yeah, thank you guys very much. And thank you, Katy.
Thank you, Raina. This was a lovely conversation.
Bye, everybody.